Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we're joined once again by Lior Gantz of Wealth Research Group. First of all, thank you for joining us, Lior.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. So, a lot of people have been really concerned lately about a lot of moves by the Fed. We're hearing the government, we're hearing the banks, we're hearing the central banks say that everything's great in the economy. There's no reason why we can't see great growth over the next decade, that everything's just fine and dandy. But I wanted to ask you about something that seems to be standing out to a lot of people who are watching the economy closely, is that we're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars flood into repo markets at the hand of the Fed. Can you go into what's going on with this massive amount of printing, this massive amount of money flowing into these repo markets, and what it means for the overall economy?
Sure. Um, so for 10 years, if you can imagine the monetary system, it's built almost like a building with stories. On the first floor live the majority of the population. Okay, 80 to 90%, they live on ground zero. And some people even live in the basement. Now, the lower you are, we're talking net worth and opportunities and whatever else you can imagine. So most people live either ground zero or even lower than that. On the second floor, there's really a few of us, 10% or less, and they are having a party. The reason they're having a party over there is because there's a DJ called the Federal Reserve that's just pumping in great music all night long. The people on ground zero, they can hear the music, they can hear the party, but they can't have fun as well. And that's wrong. Why is that wrong? It's because the DJ is being financed by all the people at ground zero. And that's where the frustration is coming from. What people ground zero want is either for a hole to be punctured in the wall so they can start to hear the party better and enjoy some of the fun, or for them to get invited into the party. And that's just not happening. The way that central banks have created the system in post the 2008 financial crisis
Mm-hmm.
is that the ultra low interest rates are handed out, or in other words, the cost of borrowing is such that corporations and governments get access to these incredible rates. Incredible rates when you can borrow money without paying any interest and roll over the principal indefinitely. It's like getting free money. And I'm talking about governments in Europe, the government in Japan, and what Trump is promoting the Federal Reserve do in the United States, which is go to negative rates. That is unbelievable. Corporations are doing the same thing. They're borrowing at very, very low rates. Now, if you look at the 80% of the economy, mortgages, auto loans, student debts, etc., these are not financed at artificial low rates. So there's one economy for 80, 90% of the people, and a whole different economy for the people at the second floor. And what are they doing? What are the people over there doing? We thought, or in other words, the establishment thought, and then tried to convince the general population, hey, when the DJ starts cranking the music, these people would love to share with you this great party. So they'll open the doors and they'll raise wages on you, they'll hire more, everything will be fine. They called it the trickle effect. And that did not materialize. The trickle effect didn't start happening until 2016 when we had elections in the US and somebody came in, cut taxes, deregulated thousands and thousands of rules from the rule book, and did stuff that no other president even thought of doing. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not even an American voter or anything, but what Trump has done has created confidence with regular Americans, and there's incredible benefits that have happened to millions of people in the States and even outside the States because of what he's done. The downside is that he's rattled the cage. So he's created all sorts of problems with geopolitics, etc. Maybe stuff that that were due anyways, and somebody had to make the tough choices. But nonetheless, there's a price. In other words, what's happening in the world is that 10% of the population, 10 to 20%, are really benefiting from the system, while 80% are not. The problem is that this is all being financed by these 80%. This is financed by deficits. And who pays for these deficits? It's going to be the taxpayers.
Yeah.
So the people on the second floor, they're transacting with each other. So they're buying stocks off of each other, not obviously not directly, but through the stock market. Companies are buying back their own stock. That means the shareholders who live on the second floor as well are seeing the stock market hitting all-time highs 20 times only in 2019, and 2019 being the best performing year for stock market in the United States since 2013. This is after 10 years of a bull market. That's insane. Real estate funds have gotten into real estate about 6 to 7 years ago, big time, and the prices of real estate have gone berserk, much higher than the affordability of the average person. Thousands and thousands of units are being held with institutional money, stuff that did not happen before 2008. Bonds are the most expensive in history. A bond is expensive when the rate goes down. So in other words, the more the rates are negative, the higher the price of the bonds. So that's been an insane bull market going on from 1982. So 37 years of a bull market in bonds. Precious metals have gone up dramatically as well. It's the best performing asset of the 21st century, gold. Gold is. So these are times when people that have assets have benefited tremendously, and people that are on fixed income do not have a lot of savings power and are just everyday people have dramatically seen that the gap between the way they live and the way people maybe 20, 30 minutes away from them in the same city, in the same areas live is completely different. And they can't, for the life of them, understand what are these people doing so differently than themselves.
Yeah.
And that is the reason that there's so much frustration, because you see other people and you say, am I so in, what is the problem with me? And if there's not a problem with me, is there a problem with the system? And so you're asking me about specifically about the repo operations or the repurchase operations. These are operations that are happening because the Fed has created a monetary policy that is very different than other central banks, like the European central banks or the Bank of Japan, and they've tightened interest rates in 2018, and now they've started to unwind that tightening. So they've started to expand the balance sheet, and they've lowered interest rates 3 times. But what happened in September is that the obligations, the dollar obligations for European banks, the need for dollars around the world was so large that it created a squeeze on the demand for dollars, and there was not enough supply. So a repurchase agreement is just a banking term for the Fed injecting liquidity into the system overnight and taking it out, and they're just putting it in and out. It's very technical, and they're just making sure that there's enough dollars. Otherwise, banks will pay each other about 9 to 10% overnight, which is obviously not sustainable. But this is similar to what we saw in 2008. So in other words, a problem in the flawed financial system, and that problem in 2008 shocked Russia, it shocked China, it shocked the BRICS countries in general. And that's why since then they've been trying to figure out what can we do to unshackle ourselves from Wall Street, unshackle ourselves from the dollar system. Is there something we can create, an alternative to the dollar system? Because obviously we thought this system was amazing. We thought that they can endure anything. We thought America was such and such, but 2008 shattered all myths. And so we are in a situation where the dollar has a different, people view the dollar differently today. Governments view the dollar differently today. It's sort of a, Josh, if I can exemplify it, it's like a marriage where they're not, the husband and the wife are not happy, but they fear divorce even more. And so that's what the dollar is to other countries right now. It's a marriage, but they're just more afraid of what can happen if there's going to be a divorce. So they cling on to the marriage, even though they have the option to do a full divorce. They just are very afraid of what's going to happen after more
Right.
than yeah.
Yeah, and it's a good analogy. And I mean, going back to your previous analogy, it kind of just reminds me of Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And it's getting to this point where it's not just the United States lowering interest rates. Of course, Australia is lowering interest rates. Britain's lowering interest rates. The ECB is lowering interest rates. And it's to a lot of people, it's shocking to hear someone like Donald Trump go on Twitter and say that he supports negative interest rates. I wanted to ask, considering that we're seeing interest rates go down in so many different places, and you alluded to a bit of the problem there. This idea of going back to 2008, I believe that we've still been in a recession the whole time, papered over and over again. But with that said, we saw interest rates go down around 5.5%, somewhere around that between 2008 and 2012. But considering that we are still in a recession, in my opinion, you could disagree. I don't know what you think about that. But going forward, bringing interest rates down so low, doesn't that put us in even further danger, say, once the recession is realized and once we see a collapse, which inevitably has to happen eventually? With interest rates so low or possibly negative, what does that mean for the economy? What do you think?
Well, that's exactly right. That's the reason that the Fed cannot just, though the Fed is the central bank for the United States, and it would love to help. In other words, on an official capacity, would love to help Washington avoid interest payments, which are costing the taxpayer $1.6 billion a day. In other words, there's little concern that creditors would not accept a bond with a 0% coupon. If they accept a 0% coupon from Belgium and Bulgaria and Latvia and all these countries that have a much higher risk of default in the US, why not accept a 0% coupon from Washington, right? So the Washington or Donald Trump is saying, look, if I can refinance the entire national debt for 50 or 100 years into the future with 0% attached to it, 0% interest rate attached to it, why shouldn't I save the taxpayers $500 billion in 2019 alone and much more in 2020? The problem is, like you said, when you lower the cost of borrowing in this system, in this sort of, not a free market system, but a system that is built on central banks, when you lower rates to zero, you are cutting the capacity of the most powerful financial institution in the world, a central bank, to help the economy do the same thing that they did in 2000, which is benefiting the rich. Nonetheless, that stimulates corporations and governments, etc. We can, my opinion, obviously, is it's unfair, unjust, experimental, and leads to incredible booms and busts. But if you're asking me about the current system, not under the gold standard, a purely fiat monetary system, what is the risk of cutting rates to zero? The risk is that you cannot stimulate the economy any further. So what does a central bank? What is a central bank worth if you basically marginalize it by putting rates to zero? Well, it's not worth a lot. What it means is that the next step is what we call fiscal policy. Fiscal policy are all the ways that the government can create situations that stimulate the economy. In other words, they can borrow, create more deficits at zero rates, put millions of people to work with renovating roads, bridges, building the 5G system, whatever you want to put people to work doing. You can create special opportunity zones where the government incentivizes corporations to go into distressed zip codes, take real estate without paying any taxes, without paying any corporate taxes in these specialized areas. They can do many things. They can cut regulations. They can cut taxes. They can cap import, export. They can do many things. This is what the government can do. It's called fiscal policy. And what you're seeing already is that the voters are voting for it. They're saying, hey, why don't we have a debt jubilee on student debts? So, in other words, the government would eat up all the student debt loans and chuck it up as expenses on their books. Why don't we tax the rich? Why don't we do this, do that? These are all fiscal policies that are being talked about and discussed as we go into the 2020 election. So, if you're asking me, what is the problem? Yeah, the first problem is that the central bank cannot do what it has done in every crisis and slowdown since 1913, which is cut rates by about 5.5%, like you said. So in other words, if we are talking about the economy as it is, if you cut rates by 5.5%, we're going to -3% real rates. Obviously, not something that the Fed will ever do. I don't want to say ever, but unlikely. So
I don't know. Things are getting pretty crazy, Lior. Something
yeah,
tells me that there's a possibility that they could seriously actually go really deep into negative. I don't know. A lot of people have been theorizing it for a while, and it seems like they've got the president's permission. So I don't know. What do you think? Is it possible at all for us to see something that low?
not for a reserve currency.
No.
So the United States, the thing about the dollar is the currency of choice for 62% of the world's transactions. So it's not a local currency. It's not like something you can contain within the U.S. territory. 50% of the dollars are not in the U.S. banking system, anyways. In other words, when you lower rates for the dollar, you're creating a huge butterfly effect around the world. It's not like something that's just happening inside of the U.S. When a small country like New Zealand, etc., cuts rate, the New Zealand dollar is mostly used inside New Zealand. They can foresee what's going to happen. They can contain the unintended consequences much better. When you do that with the dollar, you have no idea what can happen. This can cause all sorts of distortions where one country for some reason has a shortage of dollars and now they cannot import rubber into the country for 3 months. All sorts of stuff that leads to wars in the end. These are not games. This is trillions and trillions of dollars that we're talking about. So just take for example, Josh, last December, 1 year ago, when the Fed, what did it do? It hiked rates for 4 times, but the interest rate only rose to 2.25%. That's half of what they are, half the normalized rate of the 10-year bond for more than a century now. So that 2.25% caused a 20%, a 19.2% decline in the S&P 500 in 1 month. The reason? All of the companies in the world, when interest rates were low, refinanced all of their debts. Now, when you refinance debt, there's a principal payment to it, and there's an interest component to it. When the interest component to it, what did they do? They hiked interest rate by 1%, right? Four incremental hikes of 0.25%, but it went from 1% to 2%. So on a percentage basis, they raised it by 100%. And so your interest payment on all the debts that you have gone up 100%. In other words, if you have a mortgage and the interest component of it is $600, and that's what you're prepared to live off of, and now it's $1,200, so in other words, double, and you cannot afford this, you're going into default. Now think of the entire of corporations globally going into such a panic attack, and that's why the Fed had to reverse course. The world can never, and you can quote me on this, the world can never go back to normalized rates under this current system ever again. Ever. We are going to live in a world of low interest rates. The problem with that is that if inflation picks up, and there are a number of reasons why it can become a problem in the coming decade, you still cannot raise rates. In other words, you have the risk. You run the risk with what we're doing right now, with what central banks are doing right now. You run the risk that there's going to be an inflationary surprise in the coming decade, which will not be met with higher interest rates like they did in 1980 with Paul Volcker. You cannot do that anymore.
Wow.
When he did that, the United States was the world's largest creditor nation. It loaned money to other countries.
Yeah.
It's not the world's largest debtor nation. It just cannot function on these terms.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are concerned about, and we've talked about this before. We won't go too deep into it this time, but a lot of people are concerned about China possibly becoming the reserve in the next 10 years or so. But with that said, I wanted to ask, because lately we've been hearing a lot of silly stuff out of Jerome Powell, talking about how what he's doing is not QE. He keeps saying that what's going on is not QE. It's clearly QE. But what do you think about these statements from Powell and this whole not quantitative easing?
Well, what Powell's doing is he's trying to make sure that the markets price in the fact that this is not official stimulus. In other words, what he's telling investors, funds, and institutions worldwide is what we've started doing. It's not even QE. Don't worry. If there's going to be a problem, I will come in with QE, so you don't have to worry. And that's why the markets are reacting with new all-time highs, because what he's telling you is, if you love this cheap money, just wait. If anything happens, I'm coming in with QE again. So that's what he means by not QE. He means, it's like you have a 3-year-old and he's trying to climb up this ladder, and you're afraid he's gonna fall. So you put one hand. You tell him, hey, I'm not really holding you. You're doing this by yourself. You're doing this by yourself. He gets a whole lot of confidence, right? And then he falls a little bit, and you put 2 hands, and now he sees that you're really holding him. So he's very confident. And that's what he's doing. He's telling you, hey, one hand is nothing. Don't worry. I can come in with both hands. So that is what he's saying by not QE. He's telling you, hey, if there's a problem, I'm going to come in with all my might and force, and I'm going to stimulate even more.
Yeah, well, and we know things have been really propped up and faked over the years. There's so much fake money and fake prosperity, and obviously there's a lot of opportunity in that as well. But I want to ask, going forward, a lot of people talk about the doom and gloom, and honestly, I think it's important that people understand the problems in order to apply the right solutions. I think that's extremely crucial for people to acknowledge. But with that said, going forward, what do you think is positive? What has a positive outlook going down the road? What opportunities are there? Maybe even not in the stock market or as far as the economy goes, but opportunities for people to kind of have a safe haven for their money, for their wealth, preserve their purchasing power. What do you think?
So for one thing, with everything that's going on, to not call what we have gloom and doom is also misleading. So the markets are at all-time highs, but seriously, who's enjoying it? Who owns? So the S&P 500 returns just about 7.5% a year. That means that every dollar that you put into the stock market, it doubles in about 7 to 8 years on average. In other words, if you don't have a significant amount of money going into the stock market, the money that you will make in the stock market is irrelevant to your life. So the people who are enjoying what's happening are large shareholders, people that came in already with 6 or 7 figures, and they're seeing meaningful wealth added to their nest egg, and they will obviously be able to buy more assets, retire, compound, and all of that. The people that do not have that, which is about 75% of Americans, and you can probably extrapolate that number globally. So about 75% of the developed world has either no stock portfolio or a very meaningless stock portfolio. For them, all of this happening in the background is noise. I mean, they don't really care about that stuff. What they want to see is how they can rise up the ladder. And in a lot of countries, what's happening right now is that the ladder is broken. People are not finding ways to go up the corporate ladder or start their own business, and they're not finding it easy to compound their wage or their salary at a rate that's much faster than the GDP growth of the regular economy. So if a country like the US, if it's growing at about 2.5%, and you have 1.5% inflation, that means that the average person grows in wealth by about 1% a year. That's not a lot of money. That's not a lot of growth. That's not meaningful growth. So if you want to detach yourself from the trajectory of the economy, and especially in a developed economy, you have to find ways to over deliver in ways that are exceptional. In other words, to succeed in today's world, you have to really put on a lot of sacrifices, like you do. I mean, what you've done with this channel, for example, that's a tremendous amount of sacrifice. Of personal, you travel around the world, you try to find the most incredible stories to tell. You network with thousands of people. This is a sacrifice that's not being made by many people, and you should be congratulated for that. That is the type of commitment that people need to understand, that they must have in their state of mind, because with automation, with robotics, with many of the technologies that we have today, many skills that human beings have are becoming less efficient than their counterparts, their replacements. So either automation, robotics, or people of the same skill set in cheaper labor pools, billions of them, right?
Yeah.
You obviously know that the fastest reproductive continent in the world is Africa. Africa has 1 billion people right now. By 2050, it's going to be 2.4 billion. So 1.4 billion people are going to be added just in that continent. And as you know, many of them speak English. Many of them can be trained to do probably 90% of what Americans do for a living.
Right.
And so many countries are just not prepared for the 21st century as other countries are.
Well, and you mentioned Africa. I mean, people in Africa are generally speaking more self-sufficient. I mean, a lot of, I guess
that's also true.
Yeah, and we could blame a lot of the culture of dependency within the Western world, especially for that, because you talk about automation. And honestly, I mean, statistically speaking, automation does lead to more jobs than it destroys long term, but it's a long term kind of waiting game that you have to play. I mean, 50% of the jobs that exist today didn't exist in like 1995, and a lot of that's due to automation. However, it comes down to individuals being independent and responsible and self-sufficient to actually open up new avenues, new markets, new forms of innovation. I mean, it can lead to new technologies. It can lead to new markets that we can't even comprehend at this moment today as we speak. And I think there's so much opportunity in that, but I find so many just give up so easily. People become dependent. People see, problems, and instead of facing the problems and trying to make the best out of it, they sit back. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen videos, Lior, of a 16 or 17-year-old who can't even use a can opener to open a can of soup. I mean, we've gotten to this point where, look, I think the millennial generation is going to be huge in the future, but at the moment, I'm seeing a culture of dependency that's really impeding on our ability to face these problems today.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real problem. The fact of the matter is, nobody's waiting for America to become great again, quote unquote, right? The rest of the world is doing its thing, and as much as I admire the fact that Trump wants to bring manufacturing back and retrain many Americans. In other countries, there are people who are at 6 a.m. ready to punch, to get into work, and they're ready to leave at 11 p.m. They don't care about regulations. They don't care about a coffee break at 10 a.m. or lunch break, and the world is incredibly competitive. Many countries have labor pools that are hungry, not for food, hungry for success, and are ready to put pride and ego aside and are willing to work. And that's a problem for the United States and for other developed countries as well. Many of them being in Western Europe, where people they cherish their breaks, they cherish their leisure hours, etc. But billions of people, they don't care about that. They see the promise and opportunity of what's happening in the world, and they want to join in. They want to climb the hill. So the what happened in the U.S. post World War II is a miracle, and it's not the norm. And but Americans have to understand that. They have to understand that they had an unfair advantage that was caused by World War II and the fact that they were left intact and became the empire, the leader. But it's nobody guarantees that in the 21st century.
Of course. And what you mentioned there is another example, a prime example of very self-sufficient people. And it goes back to that old saying, hard times create strong men, strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it kind of just goes around that circle.
Yeah, it's true. And actually, it's well researched and documented. And many rich families are going through this crisis where they try to bring an outside wealth advisor and break the statistics that after 3 generations money just evaporates. Doesn't matter if it's in the millions or in the billions. There are very few families that have been able to keep their wealth for more than 3 generations, and the reason being that the lessons that you learn from struggling are invaluable. And it's very much true. You learn a lot from defeat and setbacks and hardship, and that's part of the philosophical debate. Anyways, should the government subsidize half of Americans? Half of Americans are on some sort of subsidy. It doesn't matter if it's income security or otherwise. Should they do that, or should people be allowed to fail, reach rock bottom, and then pick up a book? Try to leech onto a mentor, attract better people, network. Should they get out of it? My father, as an example, when I was 13, he had his first, it was a full bankruptcy, but he lost everything. He lost his business. When I was 18, he lost it for a second time. I had no parachute. And, age 13, I started to work. Age 16, I had already savings. At age 16, I read 100 investing and entrepreneurship books at age 16 to age 17. Every 3 days, I devoured a book, and it changed my entire life because, when I was 23, he went bankrupt for the 3rd time, and that's it. There was nothing left. And I had to figure it out on my own. And next month I will be publishing my first book, and I talk about that a lot. That maybe that was a blessing. Who knows? Maybe who knows where I would have been if I had the opportunity to ask my parents for something instead of figuring it out on my own. So
absolutely. I mean, every time something terrible happens to me, I just kind of smile and go, oh, this is all leading to something better. Every single time something bad happens, it usually leads you into something better. Most people can't see it in the moment. They're too caught up in the moment, feeling down on themselves. And, I just think that it's a really important lesson that everyone can learn to fail, to deal with failing, and to learn from failing, and to build themselves up from there. But we are running out of time, Lior. I wanted to ask you, as we close it off, where people can find more of your work, get involved, and kind of some of the opportunities that you provide through Wealth Research Group.
Sure. So Wealth Research Group was launched early 2016, and it's basically a labor of love. It's a free financial newsletter, and it was brought about because since 2008, people have come up to me and they've asked, what am I doing with my own money, etc. And I just said that I need to publish what I'm doing with my own money. I need to publish my thoughts about the economy, etc., and see what happens. And it became a very a large publication. And what we do is we feature both the macroeconomic stuff and also opportunities that I'm doing with my own money. And we publish it all in the newsletter. You can go to the site and obviously become a subscriber to the newsletter. You can also click the special reports tab on the top menu, and you'll see basically a wealth library of probably 40 to 50 download reports from everything ranging from Trump to interest rates, cryptocurrencies, precious metals, gold, etc. And it's all there. It's information, it's education. I think it's very important because what I found out is that if I don't read, then I regress. And that's the reason why I wanted to condense everything that I'm reading, because I'm able to read 4, 5, 6 hours a day information and look at companies and look at balance sheets and meet with CEOs. And I can compress that into the articles that we publish.
Absolutely. Well, I highly recommend everyone check out those links below. We got things linked below in the comments as well as the description. Really important to check this kind of stuff out and try to, grow your mind as far as, especially just as simple as it gets. People talk about freedom. Freedom is just individual responsibility at the end of the day. And the most important part of freedom is personal freedom, freeing yourself, freeing your mind, freeing your money, and doing whatever you can to ensure that you have wealth, your family has wealth, and you're looking after yourself and your family going down the line. That's extremely important now more than ever, because like we said, there's a lot of problems facing the U.S. economy right now, a lot of problems facing the markets right now, to say the least. But it doesn't have to be all bad. I mean, I think there's more solutions than there are problems out there. So make sure to check those links below. And again, I really appreciate you joining us today, Lior.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you very much.
Like what you see here at Wham, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We cannot do it without you guys. Every donation is extremely, extremely appreciated, as we're getting incredibly shadow banned. We've lost 80% of our audience since January of 2019 and counting. They are ripping us apart here on YouTube, and the only thing we could do in the meantime as we prepare for the next big step is to ask for help from the viewers that support our free information that we try to post on a daily basis. You can also find us on Subscribestar, where just $1 a month, that's all it takes, $1 a month is all it takes to truly make a huge difference. If everyone gave $1 a month, it would change everything for independent media, and we could win this information war, and we can defeat the mainstream medias eventually. And of course, on Subscribestar, we post subscriber-only content that you'll only see on Subscribestar. So make sure to pledge there, become a patron. That makes a huge difference, guys. And also, don't forget to check out our Bitcoin address below in the comments and description, as well as on the screen for you to scan, if you please. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on the alternatives. We will likely be deleted by YouTube in the next 2 years. It's already happening on a vast scale. So make sure to find us on float.app. That's flote.app. At Josh Sigurdson, as well as at Wham, W-A-M. Float.app is replacing every social media, and I mean, it's just incredible the opportunities it provides for not just creators, but for the average person who wants to get away from these nannies telling them what they can or cannot see. They plan to replace Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Tumblr, Reddit, and Patreon. You could subscribe to us on Float and pledge with cryptocurrency. It's really innovative. We are also on BitChute at World Alternative Media, as well as so many others, Minds, PocketNet. You can find us at World Alternative Media on Instagram. There's many options. And finally, don't forget to join us at Anarchapulco 2020, the famous event, the best liberty event known to mankind, other than perhaps Anarcho Vegas 2020. There are 2 major events coming up that we are extremely excited about, and you can use promo code WHAM, that's W-A-M, and save 10% on your tickets to these legendary conferences. There's so many amazing people speaking there. You won't want to miss it. So make sure to support in any way you can, even if it's just sharing our videos, pressing like, pressing to be notified. Anything helps, folks. You are the change you wish to see. Thanks for watching, everyone. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.